All right. Well, thanks very much. I think what we're going to try to do is get the program started. And we did test, Dave and I did test this a couple of weeks ago. So we believe everything is working. But I know there's a bit of magic that I think, Dave, you have to do on your end so that your computer audio will come through as well as your microphone.
All right. Here's a sound test. Here's a completely random audio file. See if you hear it.
Yep.
Of the airwaves. It's David
Yes.
Sproul.
Yep.
I like to know that jingle is going to outlive me. That's my immortality. Okay, let me get going with my images here. This is the only photograph that I was able to find of all our many picnics out at the Greentree site. This is from 13 years ago. There's Danny Ricin on the right. Is that Feely in the middle?
It is.
And is that the brilliant Bill Sachs on the left?
Indeed.
Yes.
Now, whose back is to the camera?
I do not recognize that person, but I'll bet somebody does. And may Bill continue to rest in peace.
Yes.
Well, I won't dwell on it. Let's see. There's a thumbnail pictures on the right that are covering up the arrow for my advance. Let's see, can I move that? Yes, great. Why am I not seeing that? Oh, well. There we go. All right, I'm going to skip over the old history. There obviously isn't time to do the old history. I was hoping to give you kind of an on-ramp to WMAL, the whole thing, and then give you a second on-ramp to the Greentree, the history of the Greentree site, with my entry into it along the way. But I think I'm going to skip over I'm just going to thumb through the images that I have for the old history. This is Martin A. Leese's optician office, and he's the guy who gave his initials to the radio station call letters. And I don't know of many other cases of that except for Joe L. Albritton anywhere, let alone here in town. But there's two stations still operating under the people who at least owned them, if not created them. But in the case of Lease, he created it. But this is Leese's optician office on 9th Street. The photo caption says 9th Street. He got into the radio receiver business, and like so many people, he needed to create a radio station to have something to listen to on his radios. I'm not sure where his radio dealership was, but his offices were on the 700 block of 11th Street Northwest, and that's where his transmitter was, and his studios were at another address in the 700 block of 11th Street. And I don't have any pictures of that, but radio stations back then were just one big room with a transmitter operator over in the corner and some velour furniture for people to sit in, and that was it. But in the late 30s, they were associated with WRC, and NBC pulled them into the National Press Club. And I have one item in my vintage rack behind my chair in my basement studio. This is Leese's own personal 1,000-cycle oscillator. It's just a black box, but when I looked inside, it's got a tuning fork in there. It's like a self fork. Didn't they have crystals back then? But a self-excited tuning fork sounds a little naughty, but I think it's a way to make for a stable oscillator. That's the only item that I have with Leese's actual name on it. And this is the advertising that got out. I think I owe this to Tom Buckley. Tom Buckley never worked for WMAL, but he seems to come up with a lot better stuff than I have on my own station. And this was to advertise when WRC was moved in with WMAL into the Translux building on 14th Street between H and New York Avenue. NBC was already really good at radio then. And they were selling so many spots, they didn't have enough inventory to place the spots. So they did not buy WMAL. They signed an agreement to run WMAL. Very kind of confusing in those years. It was like an LMA before anybody had an LMA, but they were studios together at National Press and then at Translux. And I wish I had a color picture of that thing that was on top of the Translux building. It's this futuristic pylon. I bet it lit up at night, which would be very cool. But WMAL had the second floor, WRC had the third floor. And as you probably know, the Translux Theater was in the building. And it's hard to believe that Frank Harden, who was the illustrious morning guy for 30 years after everybody got to know him, was already on the staff in the late 40s. And he told me over dinner one time that his favorite trick, for background, the theater there, during intermission, the radio station had an obligation to read news and features over the PA system to the gathered audience in the movie theaters. And so the on-air people at the stations took turns doing this, and the initiation test for new announcers was that Frank Harden would write copy that would just slowly dissolve into like a psychedelic nothingness, hand it to the guy, and then the announcers who were in on the gag would go down and sneak into the audience in the theater and wait for the intermission to come up so that they could hear the guy lose his mind reading this live copy over the PA system. So that must have been maybe 1948, 1949. And then Evening Star Broadcasting bought WMAL from the Lease family, left it in the Translux building for a while. And then come 1947, they put Channel 7 on the air. And the FM station actually, 107.3, followed a little bit later. You'd have thought that the FM would have come first, but TV, I think, was on the air first. Still owned by the Evening Star. And I think it was NBC's influence. The Evening Star people just wanted to own a media conglomerate, but NBC knew how to broadcast. And it was, I think, NBC's nudging that created the 980 site over on Agra Road a couple of years before WMAL's site. And here's an aerial photo in 1948 of the property. You can see the towers maybe at 11 o'clock up there. They're very hard to see, pretty small. But it gives you a clue. The families that owned the Star had gathered this real estate together under their own names, sort of like Disney did when they were assembling History Land out toward the mountains, but they wanted to keep it not obvious what they were doing. And the entire property, I've seen it was as much as 200 acres, but I'm more inclined to believe that it was 100 acres because the remaining part that we broadcast with for the last many decades was 75 acres. But you can see the parcels that they gathered together to make this transmitter site proper. This is Greentree Road coming out, and it wandered around through the woods and continued on out before I-270 came up here and made it a dead end. This is Fernwood, came up and dumped into one guy's yard and then went up here and ended in another guy's yard. There was no Democracy Boulevard up here. And this lower lobe of the property was a national skeet shooting club. If you look at it in enough detail, you can figure out what they were doing down there. But the Beltway in the early 60s came around through here. And this property line is the tree line on the southern part of the current familiar property. And the rest was sold off for development. And there's one street in here I noticed is named Newbold Street. And one of the more illustrious editors of the Washington Star was Newbold Noyes, I believe was his name, Noyes. And as a chief engineer, I would not like to have worked for a radio station that was headed by a guy named Noyes, but it helps to know that it was spelled the other way. This whole property, whether it was 100 or 200 acres, was assembled for $160,000. And I could kick myself because I saw the original document totaling how they came to that $160,000. And I wasn't in the habit of scanning stuff. I found several barrels rolled up critical documents in the basement of the transmitter site. And of course, I used company time to examine them tediously and decide what was worth saving and what wasn't, cleaned it up, donated it all to the National Capital Radio TV Museum over in Bowie without scanning it. So now all I get to do is say that I saw it on its way through, but it's over in storage or on display at the NCR TV. very lucky to see all that stuff. But this distinctive northern part where the radials go up to the vegetation makes it very obvious what the land is used for. And by the way, the original copper is still there. And in 1985, we added a complete second set of copper over in between the radials. So there is as much as 70 miles of 1-inch copper ribbon under the grass there. And Cumulus is not responsible for getting it up, and I haven't figured out who is. Toll Brothers apparently is, but I'd love to go out there and watch, see how they deal with that. Let's see. Might as well move on. That's what the original transmitter house looked like, and didn't change much over the years. This was a loading dock on this, and somebody way before me closed that in. Kind of a funny story. It's got a removable floor section there so that heavy stuff could be taken in and out of the basement. And in my early years there was a heavy Xerox copying machine in the basement. They wanted to get it out. The lease was up or something like that. So they took this removable section out, put a block and tackle on the rafter, hoisted the machine up in the air, and then everybody looked at each other. They didn't know what to do next. It was sort of an ad hoc committee of people who didn't know what they were doing. And so they just slowly put the machine right back down through the hole and changed the subject. And Bill Trumbull, the afternoon guy, called them the Gwumpke Moving Company. They couldn't be trusted to finish any moving job that they started. But in later years, this was closed in. Nice Palladian windows. The Palladian windows were left when we moved to go downtown in 1974. And stayed intact for many years. But then the kids at Walter Johnson High School realized they could throw bamboo pikes through them. And I went back out and set up my sawhorses and cut plywood to cover those windows, which was kind of a shame. This is the first transmitter that was in there, RCA 5DX. And it extended along the whole wall of the back wall of the transmitter room, and its associated phaser was just to the right. RCA was nice to make these Art Deco call letters emblems for their transmitters back then. This transmitter moved out in 1959 to Kokomo, Indiana. I've got the shipping receipt, but then it's something else that I just gave to NCR TV. And to jump out of the timeline a little bit, this is that same spot as the transmitter room was configured right up until the time that the building was torn down in 2016. And there are three tiny little funny stories in this view. First of all, this door here was the chief engineer's office when I came up for my interview in the spring of '73. J.B. McPherson was in there, and I arrived in a seersucker suit and a bow tie. And I later learned that nobody ever expects to see a radio engineer in a seersucker suit and a bow tie. But I told him that I was just hoping that the radio job would be a bridge job while I applied to med school. And he immediately started to try to get me to analyze all his maladies. And I said, it's too soon. Call me back later. But then as sort of my audition, this office had two flush mount fluorescent fixtures in the ceiling. And the one right over his desk was dim and flickering. It obviously needed a new ballast. So he handed me a set of tools and he said, okay, you're going to be an engineer. Get up on the desk and replace the ballast in this light fixture. And I did, and I didn't lose any of the nuts into the ceiling or anything like that. Worked out great. And I've always liked to tell people that that light fixture stayed, it was practically the only light fixture that was working right 43 years later when the whole place was torn down. But in all honesty, it was hardly ever turned on since in the next year, this became an unattended site. Nobody bothered ever to turn the light on. Second funny story was, this is the original DX10 that we put in. When Disney bought us, they made a nice capital investment in the place. That was on the air most of the time. We were still 5 kilowatts around the clock, so it was kind of an overbuy, but we appreciated the indulgence. And but then we heard that one of the general manager thought that had been told we could put in for a 10 kilowatt upgrade for daytime. So we knew we should get rid of the 2 Bauer FB5V transmitters that were here. Both of them, by the way, went to Mexico where they don't like, well, at least at the time, they didn't like solid state transmitters when there were a lot of thunderstorms in the area. So they preferred an old, well-maintained tube transmitter to the solid state ones they could have. And I gave them away for free in return for them coming to get them and take them to Mexico. They're probably still on the air as far as I know. But this newer DX10, we were almost ready to, well, we thought we were ready to test it. And if you know the DX10, the output transmission coax comes out in the back here. And we turned it on and it immediately Viswar tripped, bang, just like that, you know, no hesitation. And we were looking at each other and like, how could we be that far off? It was supposed to be into the dummy load. And we thought, man, did somebody interrupt the dummy load or something like that? And we tried it a couple of times, bang, you know, instantaneous Viswar. And then I happened to notice this door frame back here. The inner conductor of this transmission line was sitting there leaning against the door. And we had our answer.
Whoops.
I think I know who did it, but he might be listening tonight, so I'm not going to point the fingers. Wasn't me, but it might not have been him. But he slipped that in and everything worked pretty well. One of the Bauer transmitters had sat here and it was the last one to go to make room for this. I think it was the Dexstar. Did they call the IBOC exciter a Dexstar, even if it was for AM? Disney bought the whole rack, and we were IBOC digital, I think, for only a year or two before the Disney national DOE, Clay Steele, officially declared it, quote, dumb, and ordered everybody to turn them back off again, which was a decision I agreed with. It was a misbegotten idea. In earlier years, this area where the older DX10 is was a Con independent sideband AM stereo system, which just really sounded fabulous. And I give some of the credit to Leonard Kahn, but most of the credit to Rick King, who had finally adjusted it, and this sounded great. And this was at a time when we were the flagship station for the Redskins network, and we would originate games from RFK in stereo with the crowd sizzle and everything. And it was just sublime radio. And revenue was great, ratings were great. Experimenting that way was good, and it was a pretty deeply staffed station. I've heard it wasn't all that profitable for a station that important and that dominant, but it was profitable, and it had a lot of gainfully employed people who liked to be there, and it was performing a magnificent service for the community. And so that's a win-win-win. That's my idea of a successful business. Arguments to follow. All right, I'll go back out of this part of the time frame and explain. I should have said that there were cupboards on the left. The three equipment racks on the left side of that shot were originals from RCA when the place was built in 1940. And at the top, there were just holes where these emblems should have been. And the handed down story was that an Evening Star manager was up for promotion into RCA and lost it to somebody else at the last minute, and he was pissed. And so he ordered all the RCA emblems removed from the equipment. And for sure, I did not see any RCA emblems in the whole inventory. But many years later, I was bored waiting for a phone guy to arrive. You know, those times, it's a good time to get your mail order law degree, waiting for a telephone guy to arrive. But I looked in a cupboard behind those racks, and there was a closed steel cupboard with lots of old papers, and there was a shallow cardboard box. And sure enough, the three meatballs were in there. I kept one, traded the others away for more remote gear. Every time I had a chance to trade things away, I'd get some more new remote gear for the radio station. But I still have this one downstairs. And also back there was an inventory list, extensive inventory for the whole company, these legal length pieces of paper. And the station owned a mahogany Steinway grand piano. I don't think it was out at the transmitters, probably one of the studios, but Steinway is one of the best at keeping track of serial numbers, no matter how many decades have gone by. And I found out what family in DC eventually owned the piano. I would love to find it because that's a pretty unusual thing to find a mahogany Steinway. But I have not yet been able to speak to anybody who owned the piano in subsequent years. Now, where are we? In 1947, the TV station went on the air and couldn't fit in the Translux building. And so they took over the second floor of 4461 Connecticut Avenue, the Ice Palace. And it was a pretty humble place. I was only in there a few times, didn't need to go very often, but it was kind of funky space. They did a good job of projecting big market TV through kind of humble digs. But we were lucky in radio that TV, FM, and AM all were part of getting the ABC bureau going, because ABC couldn't afford a bureau really to speak of. And the on-air people at WMAL did double duty as network people. And it helped influence the negotiation of contracts, AFTRA and NABIT. NABIT was a very generous contract, and it was worded to coincide with NBC's at the same time so that they could maintain bargaining strength. They were nearly identical contracts, and they were very, very generous. And the whole zeitgeist was that way because we were kind of part of a TV station, and the TV station was kind of part of network broadcasting. And there was just a presumed attitude of high-end excellence, I like to think. Let's see what's next. Oh yeah, it's another one I think I got from Tom Buckley, but this was a magazine ad touting the new tower at AU for FM and TV. Channel 7 built this tower. And look at them picking on the poor Washington Monument, trying to question the manhood of the Washington Monument by being taller. But the deal was that if they ever left this tower, AU would take ownership of the tower. And that's what happened in 1972. You guys at AU could correct me if I'm wrong on any of that, but that's the story as it was told to me. And AU just got done putting a really nice master antenna up the top. I gathered my grandchildren at the base of it every few days and tried to describe to them what was going on. They could not care less, but I kept at it. Here's the first remote truck they had. It's a 1948 GM. I was not there yet driving. I hadn't been born, but I've heard that this was the truck, one of the trucks that helped them get the 2-hop microwave of the Apple Festival from Winchester in the late 40s. It's just incredible that they could do something like that in the early days of TV. And I've heard it's mainly because of the research that World War II yielded for microwave technology. A listener spotted this truck out in Damascus as being used for a chicken coop. And he could not remember where he saw it. Drove me nuts. I really wanted to get out there and inspect it in close detail. He could never remember where he saw it. And I thought the odds of crisscrossing all of Upper Montgomery County trying to find this thing. So this is, I only have a couple of pictures of it. Too bad. This, when the boss who hired me, J.B. McPherson, distinctive guy, very short, feisty. Whenever he'd stick his head in the studio with Bill Trumbull to scold him for missing an EBS test or something like that, Trumbull would say, "There's no fitter in McPherson," and then McPherson would get even madder. But J.B. McPherson died in 2004, and after that, his widow asked me to stop by and sort through his technical equipment. And in the basement, I found a little clump of microphones covered with kitty litter, and this was one. And to me, this is the best of the litter, because it had that ABC flag on it from the start. And I've seen so many newspaper clippings from the 40s that could have been this mic. I don't know. There was also a pretty rough 77 DX that had a really old WMAL inventory tag on it and a few forgettable microphones. But this is still in my basement. Thank you very much. In case something happens to me, you know where it is. Then 1960 came, and Andy Ockershausen, the radio genius, took control of the station, took Frank Harden, Jack Weaver, who had already been on the staff for 11 or 12 years, and put them together in the morning show. And it immediately caught on, and momentum built quickly, even though we were still out there at the Greentree Rd studios. By the way, when I first got there in '73, I was amazed at how humble that place was. A lot of the wiring was stapled to the walls. The doors between the studios were simple one-pane window, regular interior doors, but they did the job. Nobody complained. And the on-air sound was superb. And this is another poster from that era when they were just getting going in the early 60s. And let's see, late 60s, revenue was great. The whole business was just swelling and growing. And so the Jansky and Bailey convinced them that instead of being on the same pattern 24 hours a day, they could come up with a daytime pattern that was fuller, fatter, would cover the area much better. And so we had to go to a 2-mode phaser, and they, Multronics, John Mulaney and Multronics built it and installed it in 1968. And they got rid of the Collins transmitters that nobody liked, that had only been there for 10 years and or less than that. Bought the 2 Bauer FB5Bs. And here's the panel that controlled the phaser. That's still in my basement. Everything's still in my basement instead of room to move around or things to entertain the grandchildren.
Dave, which Collins transmitters?
They had a 5 kilowatt transmitter and a 1 kilowatt transmitter, and I've never seen pictures of them or seen a description of them. I think they were installed wrong. They were installed in the foyer of the building instead of back where the transmitter should be, and the employees immediately started complaining about heat because the place still had lots of employees there. And they should have had 2 5 kilowatt transmitters, main and alternate main, instead of relying on the one all the time, because only non-direct was supposed to be 1 kilowatt. Just everything about it seemed to be awkward. And I don't know why they got rid of them, but they did in 1968. And put the Bowers back at the back wall where everything really belonged. And I guess I should spend a minute talking about the attic, because the attic was just tough enough to reach that almost nobody went up there. You had to get on a 10-foot ladder and then go through a scupper straight up into the attic. And a lot of people don't have time to do that. But the chief engineer in the 60s was Harold Yates. And he decided that that would be the perfect place to put all his ham gear and all his excess parts and all. And the first time I saw it, it was like something out of a bad acid trip. When I stuck my head up there, you would not believe that just vast stores. There was hundreds of every kind of component you could want, electrolytics and transformers and barrier strips. There was even a gigantic, what would you call a big PA system that was from a Navy ship. It's like the kind of thing you step up to when you want to say something and have the whole crew in the ship hear you. That was sitting over in the corner. And I eventually found somebody who, in return for carefully lifting it all down, took it all in return for just cleaning out the attic. But I did get a VHS video where I just stood in the middle and did a pan around to show everything that was there. And by the way, that reminds me, Eric and Dan are free to give out my email address. Well, everybody knows what it is now. But contact me later if you'd like any of the things we don't have time for tonight. Videos, stills. Love to talk to people, but I feel like I should keep moving here. There's the Multronics plaque that's still on. It's reflecting the red carpet in my room. It's just a regular brass plaque. The basement of the transmitter building, the program department had a few offices down there, and somebody with pencil put these huge drawings on the wall. It's like something you'd expect somebody imprisoned to do, which isn't too far off the theme. But those images were still there when the place got torn down in 2016. Never did find out who put them there. It's the only shot that I have of the studio in use there. That's Tom Gager sorting out the day's records with Bob Omond. Really cool, nice, funny guy. He was just so naturally funny that Bill Trumbull once tried to pay him to help write stuff for the show. And it's like performance anxiety. As soon as he was paid to be funny, he never said a funny thing again. The deal didn't last long, in other words. It was too much to expect. But I hope you like this rack back here with the sound scriber. Used cast off videotape at slow speed to do a logger, and boy, did it do a poor job of logging. And the old Conrad box, I think there were like 3 wired light bulbs on top of this rack, and nobody knew what they signified. At least I didn't. One of them was probably for the Conrad, but I don't know what the other 2 were. But that's the window. We could climb out and play horseshoes or barbecue or something. Or we could go through the front door, but that's boring. But that's Bob Omond and the Ward console before Ward Beck. And let's see, Tom Gager was forced out in 1986. We'd been down at 4400 Jennifer for many years. But after being there for almost 20 years, he got into a contract dispute. And I remember him walking through the newsroom declaring to everybody that he was out. It was like 1986. All these years later, I noticed this is the tag he still has on his car. He lives north of Harrisburg, and we met up to go to one of the auto shows in Carlisle. I've been going to the Carlisle auto shows twice a year for 30 or 40 years. Still got that on his car. Can you believe it? That's sentimental loyalty. This was the air lineup in the 1975, Hardin Weaver, Tom Gager, Ed Meyer, Bill Trumbull, Felix Grant, and Bill Mayhew. Let's see, I don't want to leave out old Larry Krebs. He was the police and fire reporter all night with Bill Mayhew. Former undertaker, and then a broadcaster. And before I leave my role out at Greentree, I should say the first night that I was there, I was in the overnight shift. That's where you learn the details how to run the place. And with the NABIT contract, there was always 2 techs on duty around the clock every day. And so there was always somebody to learn from. And I got in for the overnight shift, and the announcer, I won't tell you who it is. It's probably not who you would guess it is. But he saw that I was a new engineer, and he came over to me and said, "Son, you don't tell anybody about the woman in the basement. You got that? Don't tell anybody." And I said, "Okay, yes, sir. Okay." And then I wandered away, and I said, "Wait, there's a woman in the basement?" And that was my initiation to overnight radio. Now, where was I? 1977, Joe Albritton had come to town. He bought the Evening Star, Channel 7, WRQX, well, WMAL, AM and FM. Immediately turned around and sold the newspaper for the same amount that he had spent for the whole group. And so he was doing well. He spun off the radio properties to ABC, and I served as the town crier running up and down the main hall announcing it, because we were glad to be going to such an organization with such a good reputation. And that's the sign that I chipped off the lobby when we were rudely sold to Citadel many years later. But this is what the transmitter building looked like in those years. I made it a point to keep the trim painted. I personally trimmed the bushes every year, got the vines out of them, put a new roof on the place. Not many years after it was torn down. You can see WJLA's downlink dishes that they downlinked ABC and microwaved it to Chesapeake Street from that tower. We did not have.
Spent many days out there working on those dishes.
You did? I think Teltronic was out there sometimes.
Yeah, no, I was maintenance tech at WJLA at the time. So I spent
You
a lot
really?
of time out. Yeah, so I spent a lot of time out there with the IRDs and those dishes.
I didn't know that. That's cool. We'll have to talk sometime. They are still there. They're totally overgrown with vines. They're practically the only man-made things still there. And I want to be there when they're pulled apart just for the ugly visual. The tuning houses are still out there, but I was out there when all the other people had left and the towers were knocked down. And the excavator came up to this tower, was getting ready to knock it down, and he turned to me and said, "Are you sure Channel 7's not using this anymore?" And I said, "No, I don't think they're using it." And he started to knock it over, and then I said, "No, wait." I think he laughed, but he chopped it up into little pieces within minutes, and all the steel from out there is gone. Keep going. I think this is a nice shot of the field I mean, what neighbor would not like to live beside that? Never fenced. Even the weeds smelled good. It was just an attractive place to work. And I felt sorry for all the people who were transferred downtown with the studio because I got to keep coming out here. One of the neighbors told me that an airplane landed here in the 60s. Guy had engine trouble, and he just left it there for a week while he went shopping for parts, and he'd come out and tinker with the airplane. I had never heard of that before just a few weeks ago, but then when he got it running again, he just took off again. But we also heard that one of the naval engineers who owned his own little plane once deigned to land there without permission, but he was fired on the spot and had to take off again. I have flown a helicopter down between these towers. As you may have noticed in my bio thing, I've been flying helicopters for years, although with an instructor. And I'll touch on that in just a minute. Then Disney bought us in 1996. Didn't make that much difference. We were still part of the ABC radio group. And it was just nice being tucked into an even larger corporation with stability and stock and stuff like that. But it didn't take them long to get kind of tired of owning, and the radio business was starting to be stressed. And in 2007, they finally agreed on a price and sold us to Citadel. Oops, I'm getting ahead of myself. Just a little bit. Yeah. Oh, well, never mind. I should cover 9/11. Chief engineer was Don Culp for many years after JB McPherson left. Don retired in the summer of 2001, just a couple of months before 9/11 erupted, and that was totally his luck. And I haven't heard a single word from him since. Nobody has. If anybody has heard anything about or from Don Culp, I'd love to know how his life has worked out. But because of 9/11, the company agreed to put an ISDN line to my basement studio. I've had this studio for more than 20 years in my basement, and it still looks like that with this slide out for the Technics turntables. But I live only a couple of miles from the studios, and I thought it was a decent backup strategy in case we had to go running. It was never needed. That's a good thing. I did not bother to keep a Telos Zephyr here or anything, but the line was functional until I retired. This was WMAL's production board from 1974 to 1994. And when they renovated the studios in 94, I just decided to put a hook in this thing and drag it home. No regrets. It still sounds great. I'm amazed. I haven't replaced any electrolytics or anything. But for a few years, I had a table saw, and table saws are good for cutting rectangular pieces of wood. And suddenly everything looked like it needed a rectangular piece of wood. So I made this base for the turntables. And I also made this housing for the neon sign, Smooth Jazz neon sign that had been in the lobby of WJZW when they were in the King Street Courthouse building. And one of the WMAL guys came over and helped me hoist that up and hang it on the ceilings, like 200 pounds. What's going to happen to that in the future, I do not know. But it's still there, Smooth Jazz 105.9. Then Citadel bought us in 2007. And just in time for the 2008 crash. And so they were miserable, very quickly miserable. They had to declare bankruptcy in late 2008. And man, I never want to go through that again. COD, having to pay for everything in advance, sort of like minus net 30 or something, I don't know. But that was an uncomfortable time. They came out of bankruptcy in 2009, but we're still feeling very anemic and started to look for a buyer. And suddenly preferred stock held by C-level people was worth $30 a share. I can never figure out how that happened. But Fareed Suleiman sold to Cumulus. And I finally had to object to the fact that ABC Radio was this signage on our building several years after we were not owned by ABC Radio. And so I had Jack Stone signs come and take the ABC Radio signage off the building. And I, of course, saved one of the big ABC circular things that's in my basement, just in case. You know, that's my excuse every time I take something home, just in case. But then we were Cumulus. And They didn't fare much better. Financially, the business was under such pressure that it's very uncomfortable, very uncomfortable. And here's Lou Dickey, CEO, fretting. And he was fretting so much that in 2012, 2013, he was quoted at a board meeting saying that he was going to help the company bottom line by selling some real estate in Bethesda. And I was quoted as saying, uh-oh. And I knew what he meant. They started shopping for a buyer. They finally found Toll Brothers. And they had negotiated to finally close on the deal last spring. And controlled demolition was hired to take the towers down, and all the prep for the towers was done, and fencing around everything. We were ready to go. But then Montgomery County said that Toll Brothers had to conform to a conservation easement of some kind, and so it was postponed for another 6 months. And finally, on November 4th, the beauty came to an end. I mean, what neighbor wouldn't like to see this out of their backyard? This is looking southwest at sunset. But when I had heard that the land was going to be sold and things were coming to an end, I had Brian Wilson, who was one of the morning guys at WMAL. I knew he had a drone, and he and I met out there one afternoon. I wanted to make sure we got a good record of what this place looked like. This is kind of a low res video, but see what you think. No audio to this. I later edited it into a full music presentation. Isn't that cool? Getting to that close to the beacon. And I had hoped to save that very beacon. Tom Bunk quoted me a price. And I thought someday, but the someday never came. That's looking northeast. We've got Montgomery Mall there a little bit to the left. Got a much better video coming up, by the way, if you're still with me. Isn't that a cool shot?
It's interesting to see it, the beltway from the towers, when I'm normally accustomed to seeing the towers from the beltway.
That's right. A very unusual vantage point. Here's the back of the transmitter building, and the JLA microwave tower still up. I won't take your time explaining, but the marble conference room table from the station is under that tower. Well, it's still there. All right, a sunset on that site. And then I should jump back to 2016. This is the right wing of the transmitter building, and I wanted to stop for a second to point out that this is the AFTRA announced studio, and this is the NABIT control room, and that's really the only substantial facilities in the place. There was a little announce booth over here where people could record talk tracks for the automation, FM automation. Connie Adams, the producer for the Hardin and Weaver show, could answer the phones and remind Frank and Jack not to go long on live reads because the FCC was monitoring us. She actually put a stopwatch on them. Okay, and then I'll advance this to save some time. You see what happened to this place. That was an emotional time. And then the next video, the heck with the studio building, now the serious hardware. Some of you may have seen this. All right. Dan, let's see, can you, oh, I haven't enabled my video yet. Could that be it? No, yeah. When I speak, can I get video or am I locked out? Oh, no.
I'm confused. Eric, you're muted. I'm not sure I understand the question, David.
Because I'm not seeing myself on, well, you might be seeing me through the screen share computer, or are you seeing me through, I'm in on two computers. I'm in on an iPad.
We're seeing you looking at us, but we're not
Yes.
seeing a screen anymore.
Yes, we lost the screen share.
That's right. I gave up the screen share.
Okay.
Yep.
I just want to make sure, I want to make sure I'm being seen. You know why?
Yes.
Because I have the last thing that was left from the transmitter site. You ready?
Go for it. Oh, there you go.
One of the
And
uplights.
This is the, yeah, it's one of the lights from Tower 3, the lowest level, southeast leg, and it just bent over and didn't hit anything hard, and so it survived. And I'm still not sure which are you seeing me through? This one?
Yep.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Great. This is one of the SSAC flashers that's actually flashing that thing in my hand, and it's one of the spares that flash the beacons on top of the towers, so it can do the big job too. I think considering the time, yeah.
Hey, David, this is Rick.
Yes. Hi, Rick.
Hey, so how many albums did you take from that location?
Oh, record albums.
Yeah.
I've got the whole WMAL LP library, but it was at the station for a while, and I culled it for jazz and comedy, and then a few other things, and antiques and everything. You ought to come over and see it sometime when we're back mobile again. But I do have the WMAL LP library in my basement and pull it out all the time.
Those were the fun days, I swear. They were
For sure.
something.
I didn't know you were still at NIH. We can talk offline. Everybody's peeling away, I think. A lot of people are. Some people are. I see some sayonaras on top. But yeah, for the sake of time, I'll limit my presentation to that. If anybody has a question, I'd be happy to field it.
Rob here.
Dave,
we'll let them go.
Yes.
I was just going to ask, did any of the base insulators survive the destruction? I had to buy one of those many years ago, and they were very expensive.
I wanted to see what happened to them when that much force was exerted, and I didn't really know what was inside those. The first thing that happened was the outside would shatter, and then you would see that there's an inside weight-bearing cylinder. And they all shattered. They just simply shattered, because that's the thing to go when that much torque was put on the joint.
Yeah, the torque was put on. You'd had to somehow cut them loose or something.
Right.
Quick question.
Yeah.
Regarding the radial, were there radials? And if so, did they have to be popped on the demolition?
No. See, the radial, that's when I mentioned that there's 70 miles of copper. It's just under the grass. And
Yeah.
the job that we did in 1985 was even better than the original, with a lot of silver solder joints under each tower. It's all still there. And I guess they're going to have to hook a harrow to it and start balling it up, because when you're building new houses there, it cannot be allowed to stay. So
Somebody will make a ton of money on copper.
you'd think, but they got to go get it.
Back
Any other
in the
questions?
late 60s, we regarded you as the competition, and you guys sounded great. Can you tell me what your processing was?
Well, in what time frame?
Late 60s, around 1970.
I can't speak to that. It was pretty ordinary out there. There was a Gates unit right there in the control room that I think, what was that? But you could hear it flipping polarity, depending on which announcer was on. If human voices are lopsided, and it would flip polarity if it sensed that you were lopsided in the wrong way. I didn't know not much about the processing back then. It got really good when Rick King was there, and he went through 4 or 5 different iterations of CRL and AFEX and stuff like that.
Hey, Dave, I have a question for you.
Yeah.
The AM 630 site there always had a legendary RF signal, even well out of the area. What are some of the signal reports, some of the DXing signal reports that you got? Because you were always really good about QSLing. With
Yeah,
QSL.
I meant to mention that colorful card that I showed when the paint was in good shape and everything was what I made up to respond to those Scandinavian reports. They nearly all seem to be from Scandinavia, mainly because they take DXing so seriously. They would go to great lengths, literally, to stretch wire across a whole field and aim it at North America. But nevertheless, to hear air checks of our programs coming out of their emails, it was cool. They're nearly all from that direction. The other directions were complaints of interference that I had to defend, which weren't true. You know, Canadian Chatham, Ontario had a 630 station, and every time they changed engineers, they'd say we were in violation. We have to reestablish and prove it again. Every time 1260 here in town got new engineering management, they'd accuse us of having a harmonic that was on top of them, and we'd have to prove that it's more likely in your receiver, it's in your monitoring gear. Never had to remediate anything like that, but the only good stories were international DXing, if that's what you mean.
I have somebody asked about insulators. And I've got, if you can see it here, this is not from MAL because unfortunately, things being what they were, I couldn't come down for that one. But this is from WOR. I forget what year it was. Maybe 09 when they took down their old tower site in Lyndhurst, New Jersey, and went out to see what had become of their insulators. And that's one piece of a shattered insulator, and you can see where the oil had spilled out. I had to clean this up pretty well before I wanted to handle it. But
speaking of WOR, one of the commenters after the towers came down was Tom Ray. And I said, and I said, are you the Tom Ray who's famous in New York? And he said, no, it's just a coincidence. And I don't know whether he was kidding or not, because I still think it's an extraordinary coincidence that somebody knowledgeable about radio named Tom Ray would be commenting on my post. Don't know what the truth there is yet.
Interesting. And I'm honored, by the way, that you used a couple of my pictures there. That was a great visit.
I meant to say before I put them on that it's just a sign that I take the very best no matter who I steal it from. Yeah.
I am flattered. That was a great visit. You gave great tour out there, and I'm glad I had the chance to see it.
Yeah, good. Glad you saw it. And you are a huge part of the culture, at least on the East Coast. I mean, you're a pivot point. Don't take it the wrong way, but it's
Thank you. I miss being able to come down and just visit on a regular basis, and hopefully the stuff down there that I still haven't seen yet, I'd love to get in and see Channel 5 before they move out. I've never been in the 980 site, so they're definitely
right.
We can travel again, and once people can have visitors again, I will
right
be in there, I promise.
Next summer, woohoo!
Here's hoping.
Is it too late to even show you my hobbies now that everybody's really groaning? Hold on a second. I think I've got something here. Oh, that's by, well, I skipped past the steel when it was ready to ship out. This is the plane that I fly most often from the TSS Flying Club, Gaithersburg, Cessna Skylane. The club has 5 planes, but I've decided to just concentrate on this one so that I can get to know the systems better than anything else, and it's a great airplane. And then I might solo this helicopter tomorrow. The weather forecast is good, and I hope I'm not jinxing myself, but I've got like 35 hours flying in it with an instructor, but I'm hoping they're going to sign me off to fly it tomorrow. And I'm an oil painter. When I ride my e-bike down the Capitol Crescent Trail to Georgetown, I've started a series of oil paintings based on the bridges over the Potomac. There's some stand-up border guys there. A couple more pictures. And I play the piano, and I'm a happy guy. Next. I bet our hosts actually went to bed.
I'm still here.
Oh, there you go. All right, I'm all done.
Let's see. I'm trying to remember how many. We've retained most of our audience. I think we
Really?
at the peak we were at 38, and we have 32 still.
Oh, that's great. Thanks, everybody. I mean, with that, I don't even have side tone in my head. I can't even hear my own voice, let alone anybody else's. And it's hard to read a room when you're not seeing or hearing anything. I thought I could be working into a dummy load and it would seem just the same. But that's gratifying.
Not exactly a DX report, but once upon a lifetime ago when I had KGWB in Minneapolis, St. Paul, when we signed off, we could get you in our mod monitor.
Whoa. That's quite a skip. I'm going to look that up on the map and see how it works out that way. That's cool.
Yep, it was interesting. Sometimes it was you, sometimes it was our station that was also owned by the same company, KHOW in Denver. It was kind of a toss-up which one I'd get.
Huh. Speaking of being off the air, you know, we had a promotion in the 60s when the Cuban Missile Crisis was scaring everybody. And Felix Grant in the evening, I don't know whether it was his idea, whose idea it was, he told all his listeners, our engineers are going to turn the transmitters off. And if you hear anything from Cuba, we want you to know, write us what you hear when our transmitters are off, because there were rumors that Cuba was trying to jam American radio. And there was a lot of paperwork about that I sent to the NCR TV. Kooky, huh?
I kind of remember that KL and Salt Lake City had to sign off a few nights to measure that Cuban interference when when they were having some sort of dispute, because the consulting engineer that I knew said it was his opinion that there was an array that built in Cuba that was designed to not go to North America, and he thought that when they wanted to mess with the United States, they just flipped the two towers around so the pattern went north instead of south.
Sounds too easy.
One of the things I worked on when I got to NAB was this recurring interference from Cuba. And it turns out that it was a real thing. They were bombarding AM signals. They had I don't remember the details of the array, but it was a ridiculously high-powered way to fire into the U.S. So you got a lot of skywave at night, and just ripped the shreds out of South Florida and the Gulf area. And supposedly it was in retaliation for us doing UHF broadcasts in Cuba, which was kind of amusing since there weren't a lot of UHF TV receivers in existence, but that's what I remember.
Yeah, I think it was Radio Marti and TV Marti. We were to be punished for having that.
Well, I want to let David know, as a native Washingtonian, you kind of walked through my life, listening to all the talent, the on-air talent. Weaver, we had to listen to Hardin Weaver every morning when I got up. That's what you did. Everyone in Washington, D.C. listened to it until, I can't remember which one of them passed away first.
Jack Weaver died of diabetes in 92.
Yeah.
And Frank Hardin just died a couple of years ago, 95 years old.
And it was amazing. It was just what you did. And it's amazing how much dominated the market for so long.
The cornerstones of their morning show were playing the hymn at 5 till 7. And then the march at 25 after 7 with the senator introducing it. And I was so disappointed to hear Frank Hardin once complaining that he had to play the hymn that the station was making him do. You want to think that the on-air people are exuding what they want you to hear. It's part of the mystique of radio that you're hearing what they want you to hear. But that was an old Southern tradition to play a Christian hymn, and he grew up in Savannah. That's where his first radio job was. So he knew about that culture, but he thought it was not a good thing for a major market station to be doing up in Washington, D.C. That was the first thing to go. They kept the march going for a few years after they got rid of the hymn.
So it turned out that I didn't actually know it. You know, I was a big Felix Grant fan. Because my father was a jazz fan. He was a Felix Grant fan. And I didn't realize I lived around the corner from Felix Grant until I got into TV. And at the point that he
Southwest waterfront, all right?
Well, no, he lived up in Northwest at this time. This is going back to 80s, around 80. I don't know what point he went down, or maybe he was a Southwest waterfront and then moved uptown.
I think that's probably because he left WMAL in 1983.
Right. So he, but I was a field engineer and went to do an interview with him. I'm like, hey, this is around the corner from where I grew up. Yeah, it was, that was required listening was Felix Grant every night.
Big influence on me. I escorted his widow, June, when they dedicated his record collection at UDC.
Yeah.
And to pull these records out and see the same records that I played for him. It was very touching. It gripped me more than I thought it would.
Hey, Dave.
Yeah.
Rick here. Talking about Felix Grant. You know how he was so particular about his albums and everything like that. Were you working there when Jack Hansen took one of those old record albums, put it on the turntable, and just let that arm go all the way across and scratch the heck out of that?
He was sadistic. That was part of the lore that was told me. Of course, Jack was the only guy to threaten to murder McPherson too. That was something we had to live down over the years. Yeah. Well, is it a wrap?
I don't know. Have we reached exhaustion for everyone? No more questions?
And do feel free to contact me offline. Anybody, if you want to discuss, or got a lot of jingles, got a lot of stills, video. We'd love to do it with you.
Well, Dave, thanks very much for doing this. And I think this is also one that we should redo when everybody can be in the same room together. It's been quite the thing for the last 8 or 9 months to try and find things to do. And again, Steve was mentioning the master antenna. That was what we were just getting ready to do when we had to close down. And I think our last meeting was we did get the March meeting in the week that everything shut down. I think we were at WTOP, and since then it's been, a challenge to try and find subject matter. It is kind of fun. You can go to other people's meetings, but I do miss seeing everybody. And we did not have a picnic this year, and we are not having a holiday party this year. But everybody stay safe, and with a bit of luck, we'll be able to have meetings together. And I'd like to believe it'll be around Easter time, but I think it might be more like Memorial Day. But everybody stay safe, and we will, we'll be meeting again somewhere soon.
Hey, let's make it the AM picnic.
Thanks, everyone.
We're at TOP, but yeah, let's do that. That's cool.
We've done them a number of times, and I think as soon as conditions are, I think the first thing that a lot of people are going to do when the health emergencies are lifted and stuff is, see friends, family, and have gatherings. Our company had us take all of our vacation this year, and I spent it pretty much sitting at the same table that I was working from every day. So, when we can take a vacation and actually go somewhere or take an evening and have a meeting, I think everybody's gonna fulfill that. But thanks for doing the presentation. Don't lose any of the material, because I think we'll do it again. We can see everybody in person.
By the way, I think I saw John Bennett is still on. Are you still there?
I am.
I can put a good word in for you with your boss if you want to. Francis Collins and I did piano recitals together when we grew up in Stanton, Virginia. Old friend, old friend.
We work with him so much.
He's a saint. He's a saint.
There
He's
isn't a great
level-headed saint.
He's an amazing guy. So is Dr. Fauci, and I tell you, the entire NIH, every facet of NIH, every researcher is trying to fight this damn thing. So it's not. Just don't think it's not happening, because it's everything.
With dignity and balance. Every
trying
day.
to.
Right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Eric.
Yeah, I did. I thank you very much, John. I did see the Washington Post thing. I think it was yesterday that Dr. Fauci did it at 1 o'clock. I don't know if he's doing those from your facility or if he's got a camera and a backup at his house. But
we haven't done a news hit with him since March 31st. We did 32, and then with the social distancing, he's just been doing everything Zoom and from his office. So I miss him I miss him there, but I understand. So.
Yep, I know somebody who used to be a planner for some of his seminars and stuff, and he's I've never met him, but she tells me he's a fantastic person.
He really is.
Thanks everybody.